Hello, Dr. Otoo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for having the TUC. First of all, when I read the synopsis you sent for this program, and when I read all the media accounts of what Dr. Nee Ashon is purportedly said about wage freeze, I actually don't find him making a categorical statement about freezing wages. I mean, his point is that we should not expect huge wage increases. And I'm not too sure that in this country we have had huge wage increases even in the past. So given the levels of wages in Ghana, if you increase it by 10%, that cannot be described as huge wage increase. So his point is not exactly to say that we are freezing wages. He says you should not expect huge wage increases, but I don't know why he says that. Also because we've never had huge wage increases in the past. We have been having 10%, 11%, and that cannot be described as huge wage increases for public sector workers, especially when you compare with what other workers in the public sector get. So that's the first point. The second point is that, and I mentioned this on another program, that even if there was suggestion of a wage freeze, we could conveniently ignore that in the sense that there's always an appropriate forum, the public sector standing joint, where wages are determined, where we agree with governments, and if it's the minimum wage, with employers as well, whether to increase the wage and by what percentage we do increase the wage or we do not increase. And for us, until that appropriate forum is convened and negotiations start and we come to a certain conclusion that, okay, for one reason or the other, we are not able to increase wage. Until that is done, those statements can be treated as sideshows, and really, we were not too concerned about it. We can ignore them.
Yeah, so now your members can be assured, listening to you, that there's no cause for panic, and that when the right time comes, you will make the necessary representation at the tripartite and so on. How concerned are you about the number of taxes, and how are you looking at that going into the possible, salary, issues as in negotiations?
Okay, but before I talk about taxes, I think we as Labour were also assured by the president that he has not frozen wages. That's a good assurance. But at the same time, when I look through the budget, I really do not find the figures that support a possible wage increase. I really do not find the figures. But as I've indicated, whatever be the case, we need to go to the appropriate forum to discuss whether there is a wage increase or not.
Well, if you can't find it in the budget, then it tells you the story. There will not be wage increase.
So your point about appropriate time, I mean, that appropriate time legally is passed, because by the Public Finance Act, engineered by my comrade here, Mr. Tepe, he's a comrade. By that act, you should have done that in April 2020. You should have determined the public sector wage in April. But of course, we know that in April 2020, it was practically impossible to even convene a tripartite or the standing joint. Okay. So that time is past. But I'm also aware that before the budget was read, government actually had contacts and engagement with the unions, particularly the unions in the public sector, the public sector. And I'm aware that somehow we all agreed that, okay, let the budget go. Of course, we didn't know that there are no intended increases in the budget. But as I've indicated, when I look at the figures, I don't find such increases. But on the question of the taxes, I think that's also where the challenge comes. On another network, I indicated that, see, when COVID hit, the three main sectors of the economy, government sector, the firms and households, were all badly hit. But government, be government with other levers, having the ability to borrow and all that, managed to bail out households and some sections of businesses. And that was right. It was proper. That when citizens, when households, when firms got hit by a pandemic beyond their own, what they could do to recover, it is right for government to come to their aid. Now, if you fast forward it to 2021, and government now says that you are now going to pay tax, the assumption then is that, okay, the households and businesses have recovered. They are now making money, and they are now in a position to contribute in the form of a higher tax. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of assumption is wrong. Households and businesses are still struggling. Across all sectors, those that lost their job, many have not been recorded. Those that got a pay cut, 50% pay cut across all sectors, they are still enjoying or they are still suffering from that 50% pay cut. So it is not really right, an assumption to make that households and firms have recovered and that the only sector that has not recovered is government. And for that matter, households should now pay tax to support government. That assumption is wrong. But be they as it is, even if we have to pay tax, we should look at the nature of the taxes that we are being asked to pay. Essentially, petroleum tax, which is very regressive, what then it means is that we are punishing the very poor who are still under the COVID weather. Okay. We could have looked at other tax avenues, other avenues for taxation. And in your first segment, I listened to the many, many tax leakages and the exemptions that allow for some of these leakages. So again, on another network, I indicate that if you take 2017, one of the principal objectives of government was to reduce tax exemption, the amount we lose to tax exemptions. Unfortunately, in 2017, tax exemptions alone was about 5.2 billion Ghana cedis, which was 40% more than the amount used to fund free SHS from 2017 to 2019. So really, government needs revenue to plug the fiscal hole, but we need a conversation as to how we generate that kind of revenue. The idea that firms and households can accommodate extra regressive taxation for us is not correct.
Yeah, so finally, what's going to be the way out? Because your expectation from what I hear from you, but for the taxes, you may have been willing to say, yes, we understand this is covered. Therefore, we can bear without any, wage increase. But having, brought on the taxes increases or new taxes, then commensurately, correspondingly, there ought to be wage increase. The time that should have been done, the discussion should have been had, has long elapsed. The budget doesn't give a clue. As you say, it is not in there that there will be wage increase. What is going to happen?
So, first of all, even without the taxes, the expectation is that wages will go up. Of course, you realize that because of COVID, inflation actually rose beyond what was projected. And there are various reports of price increases across board. So workers expectantly were looking for a wage increase. Now, if you don't find that wage increase in the budget, but on top of it, you find these taxes, then you actually make our situation worse. What will happen is that we take the president's word for what it is, that he has not frozen wages. And we expect that in the not too distant, in the course of this month or the coming month, the various forums will be convened. The public sector standing joint will be convened. And also the tripartite will be convened for a major discussion on these issues. But ultimately, we expect that given all that has happened to workers and to businesses, we expect a wage increase for 2021 and beyond.
All right. Dr. Kwabena Nyako Otoo, Chief Economist and Director, Labor Research and Policy Institute, Trades Union Congress. Thank you very much for your time on Newsfile. Thank you. Great. Now, let's get back, and I have Dr. Theo Champong and Mr. Setekpe still on Zoom with me. Thank you all so very much for your patience. Let me start with you, Theo. The Finance Minister's performance in the House over the last 2 days. What's your verdict? There are people who say he didn't give them as much as they expected. I don't know what you think.
I think he gave a fair account, and also painted a picture of the difficult challenges that lay ahead for the country in terms of fiscal space, and the big issue being how do we raise more taxes without necessarily having a disproportionate or an unequal impact on other segments of the society. That is the big challenge going forward that we need to address as a nation. So for me, in terms of his performance, it is what it is, and I expect that he will be passed. But the substantive issues that he raised, some of which are to do with like Ijapa and Ben very well eloquently explained the issues from the perspective of the resource governance, and the wider issue of taxation of people, in the Ghanaian economy. So firms and households, and the extent that you want to support the post-COVID economic recovery agenda going forward. So that's where maybe if I have a minute or two, I can kind of give you my thoughts on what I think
please go on. Please go on.
Could be done going forward along those lines.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, in one breath, like Dr. Otoo was saying, government clearly has supported industry with some targeted tax support initiatives for SMEs in this budget. So there's like a 9-month deferment on the payment of some taxes, including corporate income tax. Although even with that one, you need to be in a profit-paying position.
Your line is muted. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Great, go on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Yes. So I was just saying that in one breath, we're seeing government imposing these new taxes, although, yes, they have also supported some SMEs, those in the hospitality and the services sector, with some tax deferrals. So, for example, there's an extension of the payment of corporate income tax for 9 months for this year. Although even that, you need to be in a tax-paying position before you can actually pay corporate income tax in the first place. But these new measures that have been imposed, as Dr. Otoo has said, for me, they are disproportionate, they are unequal, and it shows that the tax burden in this country actually is not evenly shared amongst the different segments of the population. I also teach tax a bit, and Mr. Tepe will tell you a couple of the key principles of taxation is efficiency and tax neutrality. And when you look at a lot of the new taxes that for me have been imposed, the deadweight loss is that big. So at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is to distort the economic decisions of individuals and firms, because they really are the key to sustaining the economy, even beyond government policy or government action. And these new taxes that are being imposed would tend to have that disproportionate impact, on them, especially like the consumptions-related taxes. And you also see that when you go further down the food chain in Ghana, a lot of fuel or energy is a key component in the productive or primary process in the country. So anytime you impose a tax on energy-related taxes, it tends to actually drive up inflation as well, which tends to deepen inequality if you don't have any compensatory effect or a compensatory policy action by the government. So clearly for me, a number of the taxes, and I stated this last week, I think they are regressive. I think in the middle of an economic recovery that you want to support firms and individuals, that is not when we actually go to impose some of these taxes. And there are other avenues to plug the gap or the loophole. We've discussed some of them, but I know like tax exemptions is a big thing in Ghana. We've been talking about this since 2015-16. There's meant to be a tax exemptions bill before the House that needs to be passed. And I think urgently we actually need to work on that. In the petroleum sector, we are losing $1.9 billion every year, through tax evasion. Tax exemptions itself is costing this country around 2% or $1.34 billion, right? More than enough to fund free SHS and to build a couple of roads and hospital infrastructure. So really, the emphasis, I would think, going forward should be more on closing the loopholes, closing the gaps, loopholes around exemptions. There need to be clear policy guidance and action on which industry gets what exemptions. For the life of me, I could not understand why, for example, somebody building a hotel around the airport area should be given a tax exemption, right? Or for some of the concession agreements that we do sign, we give tax exemptions that are even more than the initial investment that is being put in. These are very serious issues that we need to consider. And then lastly, the wastage in the delivery of government projects. You look at the data and you see that governments are building schools or facilities that are costing sometimes 3-4 times more than what other private individuals are doing for the same school building and facility. It's a question of inefficiency. It's a question of the lack of standardization. And we can, again, do quite a lot of work in there. And when you look at the aggregate effect of plugging these loopholes and gaps, if we're really serious about it, then it means we actually wouldn't even need to go and impose some of these regressive consumption-related taxes.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Dr. Theo Echampong, for joining us once again from his base in the United Kingdom. Once again, as always, this show is brought to you by Bank of Africa Strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Duraflux, where Duraflux goes, water flows. Having mosquito spray and coil. Pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects. And Napa Foods, it's tasty. DBS Industries and Robert & Sons Limited Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care services provider. I take a quick break and come to finish up with the Honorable Sir Tekwe and Dr. Amwa here in the studio. Now, and when I return, Mr. Tekwe, there is one gentleman who says he wants the media to subject the budget to a certain perspective. He says he doesn't seem to see a clear visionary leadership in the budget, and that should be our concern. So he asked the question, do you see a clear visionary leadership provided by this budget? Given the development chasm between Ghana and the West, I am of the firm belief that every budget must be a mini Marshall Plan for Ghana, with the aim of making this country a developed nation. The reason there are so many agitations about line items in the budget is that people don't see any vision behind the budget. There is lack of bold visionary leadership personified in the budget. People are generally concerned about their future and the future of their families. If people can't see their lives improving over the long term as a result of the policies in the budget, they might as well demand whatever they can get now within the budget period. So I return, and then you start on that note with us, and then the concerns of labor in the present circumstance. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. We'll be right back.